Well, thank you very much. It's really wonderful to be here and to be speaking to members of the Maytree network, the extended family of not-for-profits, third sector organizations, social innovation organizations that are helping to make our country more adaptable to all kinds of changes at the city level, at the provincial level, and at the national level, and then I believe also networking with social sector organizations around the world to understand what best practices are in terms of adapting to change. So I've developed a presentation to lay out, to some extent quite starkly, what some of the challenges of the 21st century are, cutting across many different sectors. So when we talk about adapting to a changing environment of risk, the 21st century is very different in terms of its essential characteristics than the post-war 20th century was. In the post-war 20th century, we had expanding economies in Western countries and increased employment and a growing middle class. And now all of those things are at risk, and that's just on the economic side of the ledger. So what I want to talk about before I get into the 5 good ideas are what I think are the goals of not-for-profits in the 21st century. And then after I talk about those goals, I'm going to talk about what I think are the 4 synthesized mega trends that are easy for not-for-profits to kind of focus around and discuss internally. And I call those things the 4 100%. Those are the 4 shifts that can be counted on given all the pressures and trends that lie underneath the surface of those 4 100%. Then after that, we'll go into the 5 good ideas. I'll chat a bit about the 5 good resources as well, and then we'll go into the questions. So goal number 1 is really for not-for-profits to find their core strength in the 21st century context. And so strength is really one of the key things we want to focus on. But how to develop that strength in a declining economic environment where it's challenging from a fundraising perspective and all of that. Flexibility starts to be a key part of strength. And I'm going to address the challenge of becoming a flexible, adaptable organization because there are many elements of that. With all these things, there's a personal element. When I talk about strength, it's your individual strength, it's your organization's strength, and it's the strength of leadership inside your organization. So the body of the not-for-profit needs to embody many more things than it used to. And organizations need to be much more horizontally aware of the people inside the organizations and their strengths and weaknesses, particularly as they relate to risk. So young members, young workers in not-for-profits and women tend to be more aware of risk. So in the World Economic Forum global research on risk, the risk perception of women business leaders and government leaders and of young people was more aligned with the real risks in the world, whether it's economic risk or climate change or other major risks, cyber risks and so on. But young people were not good at predicting the likelihood of risk and the timing. So that's because they don't have enough a priori experience. So you need to find this balance on your teams between the right experience and a priori experience and the right sensitivity towards what the risks are. And when your organization is developing its strategic plans, needs to include young people who are perceiving risks coming closer to them in a much more engaged way. So strength and flexibility, these are personal characteristics as well as organizational and leadership characteristics that are your goals, as well as networked resilience. So this speaker session is actually an example of networked resilience, sharing best practices and insights from different people who are, that Maytree thinks are going to have value to a broad network. But this networked resilience now has to embody and encompass technology platforms and all kinds of tools and technologies that the not-for-profit and third sector is doing a lot of innovation in. But that sort of needs to continue because the technology platforms to enable success, whether it's mobile platforms, the resources for those kinds of things are not evenly distributed. And so how are they going to be developed, shared resources to develop mobile applications, to reach audiences, to ensure that the grassroots efforts that need to be supported are supported? This is going to take the networked resilience piece. Sorry. So, the 100%. These are the things, like I said, we can count on, despite our many efforts to address them, that they'll be growing over time. So, economic reordering. On the right is a shot of a tent encampment for homeless people in Maple Ridge, British Columbia. It's from earlier this, or last year, or late last year. So there's economic reordering in a part of Canada that I grew up, and I didn't see that growing up. So you have this increasing pressure on socioeconomically vulnerable, an issue that you're all deeply aware of. And then, of course, the Nordstroms that's opening up at Yorkdale Mall. So there's a strong luxury goods market, and that pattern is expected to continue. That there'll be at least stability at the high end in luxury, there always is, and there'll be more challenges for the broader body of society. And then psychological stress. In the context of these secular pressures of economic reordering, and I'll speak to climate change later, and technological acceleration, it's increasing a burden of psychological stress because there's less and less that's predictable about the emerging environment. So we need to address that, and the strength, flexibility, networked resilience are all part of the human way of responding to this shifting environment. Then continued technological acceleration. This is, sorry, did I tap to in advance? Yeah. So continued technological acceleration. So we're seeing this increasing pace of change, and what some people call the Uberization of the economy, where new platforms and technologies are entering that are continuing to go after certain formerly stable job segments. So in some of my other work that I do looking at technology trends, we see this trend towards cognitive computing, where there are many human tasks that will be able to be automated and white-collar roles that will be able to be automated with computers. The legal area being one area of white-collar activity that might be quite aggressively addressed by automated technologies, where you can look, for example, lots of case precedents very quickly as a law firm, which means a lot of junior lawyers won't be hired. The good news for not-for-profits who need lawyers is that there's an opportunity to put them to good work addressing major issues. So you have continued technological acceleration, which can work for you and against you. And so the networked resilience around technology and around the development of tech platforms to serve the missions of not-for-profits becomes increasingly important. And then extreme weather and climate change, that being a growing issue. Now, there are lots of not-for-profits that are looking at socioeconomic issues, but as part of that, what is the impact of extreme weather and climate change going to be on communities' ability to adapt to change and to risk? And how will this affect the constituencies that you're reaching if they're in socioeconomically vulnerable areas? And how will you develop the continued kinds of partnerships with the public health institutions, emergency preparedness institutions, and other institutions that are maybe serving some of the people you care about and serve as part of your mandate and mission? So I think extreme weather, I have the Russian doll there, because all the problems of all the sectors and areas of the 21st century that we're concerned about are going to be affected by climate change. So it's the largest Russian doll, and every sector is sort of in some way going to be affected by its existence, even whether it's the urban level, how's your city, your region, what are the adaptation plans of your city, what does Environment Canada know about in its predictive models about how your environment and climate will change. Again, that contributes to the burden of stress, but also contributes, for example, sometimes to service delivery. If your not-for-profit is doing a lot of work in the community, then understanding how your city is going to physically change is going to be very important, to look at both the stressors on your people and your employees, and your leadership, but also the stresses on the wider community. And there are lots of lessons to be learned from Calgary around this, and that should be brought into the body of not-for-profits across the country. So, 5 good ideas in looking at these broader challenges and opportunities. So, I'd like you to consider this, and I'm going to look back at my slide here. For how many years is it possible to look ahead and plan? I would suggest that with the increasing acceleration and the faster pace of change, exercises to look at the future should be done more regularly and more iteratively. Because what we see, when I talked about the risk environment changing in the 21st century versus the 20th century, what I was essentially saying is that whereas the 20th century was a century of opportunity with underlying risk, the 21st century is a century of risk with underlying opportunity. And so the reason I have a snakes and ladders game board on here is that if you looked at a snakes and ladders game board in the 20th century, it would have roughly an even number of snakes and ladders. And if I were to reconfigure this for the 21st century, there would be more snakes and fewer ladders. And despite all the opportunity in technology and the exciting things around Facebook and Google and Apple and all these other very large organizations that are in the media a great deal, the risk has been downloaded to small organizations. So there are 2 kinds of things we take for granted in our society. One is the stability of the natural world. We count on it for all kinds of things. And the second thing is we count on the social sector to address the issues that all the other sectors aren't addressing all that effectively. So essentially the social sector is the insurance policy for our society. It's not Manulife, it's you guys. So, what I suggest is that understanding risk is more important, working more iteratively and collaboratively around these around scenarios and things like that will be very important to enable the flexibility, the networked resilience, bringing new actors in, to developing the kinds of strength your organization needs to have internally in partnership with other organizations. So, think about how long you can realistically plan, but also look as far to the future as is practical, so you can come back to the present and do little things now that add up to improved ability to be flexible. So now this isn't such a pleasant thought, this thought here, but I'd like you to think about your mission, and your mission as the seed of a response to your society's challenges. And there are many outstanding social innovation projects, and because so much energy is being focused now on social innovation because of that intersection between design and technology and being able to scale responses to problems, there'll be more and more failures in the not-for-profit social innovation sector because it'll start to resemble the venture capital startup environment. So what you want to do is try to maintain the seed of the mission and what you're trying to achieve, even if there is a failure, and be able to do the analysis on the business model, on different ways to reach audiences, on looking at the network of support that you're looking to gain from various potential stakeholders and funders, and that kind of thing. And also, how broadly based are you, how broadly based is your audience as far as getting micropayments in, having people really at the community level, at a grassroots level, really engaged in supporting the hole you're trying to fill that's being affected by the Uberization of the economy, for example. So thinking about this in a positive way ahead of time about potential failures and business models, I think is a good way to move forward and to embrace the challenges and risks that are in this space. And by the way, when people talk to me about risk in business, and I look at the risks not-for-profit space, I'd have to say that you're carrying a lot, and you should be able to speak to risk just as capably as the tech innovators who talk about the big risks they're taking. I think the risks to protect people and the environment are so essential that we've actually lost track of how essential they are. And so when the social sector is taken for granted, it means our future, our society's ability to adapt is taken for granted as well. So on that front, look at your personal adaptability in the context of these changes. What are you doing to protect your mental health? What are you doing to make sure you have the networks of people that are going to help you deal with the reality of climate change, as opposed to just talk about it, that we are in it now, and that problem has not been intercepted early enough. So in that context, I think on a personal level, people should think about, do they want to have, or young people in particular, do they want to have kids while the climate is still stable, or still relatively stable? The last time the climate was actually at a level of carbon dioxide that was considered safe by the scientific community, under 350 parts per million CO2, was 1987. So we're well down the road now. We're in no child born in Canada, Ontario, anywhere in the world today will experience a stable climate. And that means all the seasonal patterns that we've counted on for part of the stability of our emotions. Just think about it. At the end of World War II, you still, if you were a soldier, you still came out of that with the regularity of the seasons to help cushion the blows of change and to help you overcome your PTSD and to reintegrate the community. Seasons provide incredible solace and predictability to human society and to culture, and have been key to the development of human society and culture. And so that's what's being lost. So people have to think, I think, quite carefully about what do you want to do while the climate is still stable. Are there people you need to meet, countries you want to visit that are going to be climate changed, initiatives you want to begin in those countries that are going to help those people adapt to change, lessons you want to bring in adaptive capacity from Africa or from South America or from Southeast Asia or India that need to be brought to Canada as models to help adapt to change. So some of the research I did on adaptation to change at a community level around climate change, some of the most interesting models were part of a collaboration between the Overseas Development Institute in the United Kingdom and a climate organization in Ghana. And they developed some of the most interesting futures methodologies that I think ought to be brought into Canadian organizations. I didn't include that as one of the 5 good resources, but I'm happy to share that later on. And then assessing the leadership of your organization. So here's a shot of Sheila Watt-Cloutier, who's an amazing Canadian northern leader who's focused a lot on the impact of climate change on northern communities, recipient of the Order of Canada. Do your leaders have that level of ethical responsibility to speak to the challenges that lie ahead and have enough alignment with their donors and sponsors and others? Because sometimes I think there are challenges in the philanthropic community around how bad are the risks that we're facing, and are the goals that we're trying to achieve, are they sellable? Essentially, part of my message is we're going to need to have every tool of adaptation available to us. We want to use technology the best possible way. We want to harness people the best possible way. We want to have the best mental health supports for people in the not-for-profit sector as they're facing greater and greater challenges over the next 5 to 10 years. So we need to be a state-of-the-art at a lot of things to move forward. But there needs to be an alignment between the real external environment and what's happening internally with our organizations and ways to position some of those things. So for example, it's not palatable to say that we're not going to solve the climate crisis. That's not one of the things that people want to say. But over time, that's going to become more of how we have to figure out how to message resilience and adaptation and those complex things in ways that actually capture the human psychology behind it, that capture what it takes for a person to be resilient, what the limits to resilience are, at what point is change too much, where it's no longer possible to be resilient, which is why the term vulnerability and socioeconomic vulnerability is so important, because just as we're resilient, we're also vulnerable. And if the shift tips more towards vulnerability, it's harder for adaptation. So these kinds of things need to be thought about. Is the leadership really thinking deeply about the long-term health and well-being of people, Do they understand the external risk environment? And are the gaps between the messages of the organization and its mission to the public starting to stray so far from reality that people who are in the know don't actually believe that the mission is achievable? So that's another question about assessing the leadership and making sure your knowledge is embodied, your insights and understanding are embodied in your organization. And finally, the mapping of philanthropic intent to human needs. I think it's critical that the more forward-looking philanthropists are drawn into deeper and deeper conversations with the not-for-profit community to understand the risk environment a little bit better than I think is necessarily understood by the philanthropic community. If it's understood, if the magnitude of the risks are understood, then the response needs to be much more generous to the adaptive capacity challenge that we face. We've not been scaling the response either at the government level, the private sector level, or at the not-for-profit level to the extent that that response needs to be scaled. And the not-for-profit community or community service organizations in particular have done a lot. I'm going to speak to my area of expertise around climate adaptation. Between 2003 and 2012, about 1,150 documents were written by community service organizations on the need for municipal governments, provincial governments, and the federal government to adapt to climate change and to scale its response to change. So the impetus has been coming around adaptation strongly from the bottom up, with a real intense application of the kinds of resources that could be pulled together by community service organizations in Canada. In a way, the response, although we're getting a good response now from the federal and provincial government, the federal government, the provincial government in Ontario to climate change, I would argue that we're going to have to push even harder to make sure that in key areas like emergency preparedness and public health and so on, that there is adequate funding for those areas, not just the areas of the climate science, but the areas of climate response and adaptation. And I think the third sector, social sector, can make a tremendous difference in helping to ensure that there's appropriate long-term resources invested in the disaster response side of things. So just going back to the slide, co-creating with philanthropists and with other members of the not-for-profit community is going to be very important. I think there has to be a sense that there's a consensus around what the knowledge is around the megatrends, what the risks are that are being faced, and how the collective resources can be pooled to deliver a more scalable response to a changing Canada. So, 5 good resources. These resources were actually very helpful and galvanizing for me in thinking about change. So this is Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's really about 2 cognitive modalities that we have, a fast decision-making modality and a slow modality that's more reflective. And they operate at different timescales. So we all know that in our work, when we're super busy, we're in the fast modality, and in a more reflective modality, it can have a very positive and beneficial effect on our longer-term decision-making. Right now, because of the technological acceleration in part and societal acceleration that's driven by economic and technological change, there's less time to be in modality number 2. So this is also the century where there's going to be more of a risk of suboptimal decision-making. And this book is a helpful antidote to think about how to, that you have to have the modality, the second modality, the slow modality, as a regular part of your organization to actually help it adapt more quickly to change. So that's really the core message of that. And this book on SuperForecasting. So Dan Gardner and Philip Tetlock did some research on the kinds of people who weren't professional forecasters who were really good at forecasting and had a good track record of forecasting. And I think it's good to think about, can we cultivate people in our organizations that are really good at having the skills to look at the world holistically and to forecast certain areas that are important for our organization, because they're considering maybe more factors, because the ways they think, the questions they ask are quite skilled. They have an intuitive ability, and that's honed in practice. Do you have people inside your organization who can do that? And can you cultivate and build those people up? That's what I started thinking about when I reviewed this book. And then this absolutely wonderful book by Henry Mintzberg. He's a professor of management at the McGill Business School. He's also one of the most published writers in the Harvard Business Review, an outstanding business and leadership thinker. But he's of the Peter Drucker mold in that he really looks at our organizations actually delivering on what they say they're delivering, and how much of what's being said in the corporate world is really spin. So I'll give you an example. There's one organization I worked with that has, in terms of global brands, has an outstanding sustainability brand. I mean, there's enough of a chunk of their brand value tied up into their sustainability reputation that it's really good for them. But I had the privilege of looking at some of their projects, and there were only, I'd say, 0.01% of those projects that were actually deeply dealing with a sustainability issue, that weren't about, using a more efficient light bulb, to put it that way. So this book is really about understanding, what do you really need? Do you need a manager with experience, with human connection, that understands people as well as they understand stats and Excel spreadsheets? And how do you balance out the technical and quantitative needs in your organization with the human needs to understand how to see, read, interpret data? So he's not saying that having an MBA is a bad thing. What he's saying is, have 5 years of professional experience in an organization, understand people, understand how to motivate people, understand how to relate to people, understand how to be a proper leader and be supported by your peers and your leadership, to then go do an MBA. And so in the professional development of, as more and more not-for-profits hire more and more MBAs to help them align more with the business needs and business interests and develop new business models, they too need to think about the human skills of the people they're bringing in and how well they're aligned with the organization's mission. And then this book has been profoundly influential to how I think. It's called Scarcity: Why Having Too Little Means so much. Eldar Shafiq is with the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. He's based in Princeton. He's the co-author. And essentially this book is about the fact that most of our decision making happens behind the scenes. Our rational mind thinks it's making the decision, but when people are under stress, the decision happens on a neurobiological level. It happens much faster than people perceive. And so when people go through periods of constant scarcity and then abundance, as happens with rural farmers and now a lot of freelance workers and independent workers, this means that the decision making at times of abundance is so driven by need that Eldar Shafiq says that these individuals don't have the cognitive freedom to make good decisions. And I love that term, cognitive freedom. We live in a democracy. Do we have the cognitive freedom we need to make the decisions that are of import for the future of our society? And so some of the things I've talked about around psychological resilience, networked resilience, strength, and flexibility, how do you expand your not-for-profit's cognitive freedom in this environment? And I think that needs to be something that's, again, the responsibility of employees and of people who work at the not-for-profit, of management. It needs to be thought about at a board level. And I think it needs to be a part of the discussion with the philanthropic community as well. And finally, the wonderful Jane Jacobs in her remarkable book from 2004 called Dark Age Ahead. where she spoke to the challenges that we're facing in our society around community and family, credentialism in universities and colleges, where credentials are more important than a high-quality education and critical thinking. I think some of the role of science and technology, evidence-based decision-making, which the current government has promised to bring back into the fore. But note that the Trudeau government is going to face the most challenging economic conditions that we faced over the longer haul as we lead into the next decade. And they might be able to do quite a bit with the agency they have over the next 4 to 5 years. So this is an opportunity really to, I think the next 4 to 5 years are really critical for adapting not-for-profits to the changing environment, because after 5 or 6 years, it's going to get tougher as we're deeper into the 20th century. So I would suggest this book because it's a wonderful, qualitative, well-observed, Henry Mintzberg would approve, I believe, it allows people to ground their insights into data. It's actually a good book to pick up and look at her chapters and look at what's the data today to support this from 2004. So we're more than a decade since she wrote the book. And I would argue, looking at how she's shaped her chapters, that things haven't gotten better over that period of time in those areas she's looking at, but that the social sector has opportunities to look at some of those areas and see how to contribute to their alleviation